My father publicly humiliated me, calling me a useless dropout in front of our entire family. He thought I was worthless, so I let his favorite son-in-law brag about his new corporate job before revealing I was the CEO. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The fever had been burning through me for 4 straight days. It was the kind of deep, rattling chest infection that made every breath feel like inhaling crushed glass, leaving me entirely bedridden in my darkened bedroom. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn tight against the glaring afternoon sun, and the only sound in the room was the rhythmic hiss of the cool mist humidifier positioned on my nightstand. I was 38 years old, yet lying there shivering under a mountain of heavy duvets, I felt as frail and helpless as a small child. My body was completely depleted, my energy drained from weeks of relentless, 80-hour work weeks, finalizing a massive international merger that I couldn't tell a single soul in my family about. It was in this deeply vulnerable, physically agonizing state that my phone began to buzz violently against the mahogany wood of the nightstand. The sudden, jarring noise sent a spike of pain pulsing through my temples. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping whoever it was would just leave a voicemail, but the buzzing persisted. It stopped, then immediately started again. A double ring, an emergency. With a groan that scraped against my raw throat, I forced my heavy arm out from under the warmth of the blankets and blindly fumbled for the device. The bright light of the screen seared my tired eyes as I squinted at the caller ID. It was Addison, my younger sister. Addison rarely called unless she needed something, usually money for a vacation she couldn't afford, or for me to babysit her golden retriever while she and her husband went to wine tastings. But given that our parents' massive 40th anniversary gala was only 2 weeks away, I assumed she was calling to coordinate logistics. I cleared my throat, wincing at the sharp pain, and swiped to answer. "Hello," I croaked, my voice barely more than a raspy whisper. "Emily, God, you sound awful." Addison's voice chimed through the speaker, brisk, loud, and entirely devoid of any genuine concern. There was no "how are you" or "are you feeling any better?" Just the immediate, sharp judgment that had defined her tone toward me for the last decade. "Listen, I don't have a lot of time. I'm at the salon getting my foils done, but we need to talk about the seating arrangements for Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner." "Okay," I managed to say, shifting painfully on my pillows. I thought I was at table 3 with Aunt Sarah. "Yeah, about that," Addison said, the sound of a hairdryer whining faintly in the background. "Oliver and I were talking, well, mostly Oliver, and we've decided to make some changes. You see, Parker just secured this incredibly prestigious, high-level executive position at a major tech logistics firm in the city. It's a huge deal, a life-changing amount of money and status for us. So, Oliver wants Parker seated at the head table with the family patriarchs to celebrate his success." "That's great for Parker," I whispered, a knot of unease beginning to form in my stomach, competing with the nausea of the fever. "But what does that have to do with my seat?" There was a pause on the line, the kind of heavy, calculated silence that precedes a deliberate cruelty. "Well, Emily, let's be realistic," Addison sighed, adopting that sickly sweet, patronizing tone she always used when she was about to deliver an insult wrapped in fake pity. "This dinner is about showcasing the family's achievements. Parker is a rising star in the corporate world. Well, you're still just scraping by with whatever that little delivery hustle is you do out of your apartment." Oliver feels, and frankly, I agree, that having a college dropout sitting at the main tables reflecting on the family's legacy just isn't the image we want to project right now. Especially with Parker's new high-end colleagues potentially attending. We need to put our best foot forward. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath completely out of my already burning lungs. "You're moving me." I asked, my voice trembling, not from the chill in the room, but from the sudden, icy shock of the betrayal. "We're putting you at table 12, Addison stated matter-of-factly. "It's near the kitchen doors. It's just more appropriate, Em. You won't have to feel self-conscious around all the successful people, and you can just slip out early if your business needs you to go pack boxes or whatever it is you do. Oh, and also, Oliver is having the family trust restructured this week. Since Parker is the one actually building real wealth now, Oliver is transferring the portion of the estate that was earmarked for you over to Parker's name to help him with his stock options. You understand, right? You never finished school. You wouldn't know how to handle that kind of capital anyway." I lay there in the dark, the phone pressed to my ear, completely paralyzed. My own sister and my father were entirely erasing me from the family structure, hiding me in the shadows like a shameful secret, and stealing my future security to pad the pockets of a man who had been in the family for less than 5 years. They were doing this while I was sick, isolated, and alone. I had spent my entire adult life biting my tongue, enduring their sneers, and quietly building my life from the ground up, all while trying to maintain peace. And this was my reward: complete and utter discard. I didn't argue, I didn't scream, I simply couldn't find the air. I pressed the red button to end the call, letting the phone slip from my trembling fingers onto the floor. The silence in the room returned, broken only by the hiss of the humidifier and the ragged sound of my own shattered breathing. I stared at the ceiling, tears hot and fast streaming down my flushed cheeks, realizing the agonizing truth of my place in this family. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The next 48 hours were a blur of physical agony and emotional torment. As the antibiotics finally began to wage war on the infection in my lungs, my mind spun endlessly, replaying Addison's callous words on a continuous, torturous loop. Table 12. Near the kitchen doors. Restructuring the trust. Stripping away my inheritance because I was a dropout who didn't know how to handle capital. The sheer audacity of it all made my blood boil, overriding the lingering exhaustion of the illness. By the morning of the third day, I managed to pull myself out of bed, my legs shaking slightly as I wrapped myself in a thick fleece robe. I made my way to the kitchen, the hardwood floors cold beneath my bare feet, and poured myself a glass of water. As I stood at the counter, staring out the window at the gray, overcast city skyline, I knew I couldn't just accept this. I couldn't let them rewrite my worth based on their superficial metrics. I needed to hear it from him. I needed to hear my father, Oliver, say these words to me directly. Stealing my nerves, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. The line rang 4 times before he finally answered, the background noise indicating he was at his upscale country club, a place he frequented despite his perpetually precarious financial situation. "Emily," Oliver answered, his voice dripping with that familiar, booming arrogance. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I'm right in the middle of a rather important networking lunch." "Addison called me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, though my knuckles were white from gripping the marble countertop. "She told me about the seating arrangements for the anniversary gala, and the trust." Oliver let out a long, exaggerated sigh, the kind a parent gives a toddler who is refusing to eat their vegetables. "Ah, I told her to handle that delicately. I suppose she just blurted it out. Look, Emily, we need to be practical here. This gala is a milestone. It's about legacy." "And I'm not part of that legacy?" I asked, the hurt finally bleeding through my composure. "I'm your daughter, Oliver." "You are my daughter, yes, but you chose a very different path," he replied smoothly, devoid of any paternal warmth. "You abandoned your education. You refused to follow the plan I set out for you. And now you're doing whatever it is you do, scraping by. Meanwhile, Parker has just landed a senior directorship at Vanguard Solutions." "Vanguard, Emily? Do you have any idea what that means?" "They are the premier logistics and tech firm on the eastern seaboard." "He is going to be rubbing elbows with industry titans. He is the future of this family's prosperity." I closed my eyes, a bitter, humorless smile touching the corners of my mouth. "So, you're putting me by the kitchen and taking my share of Mom's estate because Parker got a job." I am reallocating resources to where they will be most effective, Oliver corrected sharply, his tone turning hard. Parker needs capital to invest in Vanguard's employee stock program. It's a guaranteed return. You, on the other hand, have no understanding of corporate finance. You'd probably just sink the money into your little delivery hobby. It's a waste. It's time you faced reality, Emily. You made your bed when you dropped out of university. You don't belong at the head table. You simply don't have the pedigree. Pedigree, I repeated, the word tasting like as. H in my mouth. Yes, now I have to go. The club president is waving me over. Wear something presentable to the dinner, Emily. Try not to look quite so worn out. The line clicked dead. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, the silence heavy and suffocating. My own father had just told me, in no uncertain terms, that my value to the family was exactly zero. He had traded me in for a son-in-law with a shiny new corporate badge. He thought he had me completely figured out. He thought I was a defeated, uneducated failure who would quietly slink to the back of the room and accept my punishment for not conforming to his snobbish ideals. I set my water glass down on the counter. The tears were gone now, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. They had planned this perfectly. They had positioned their pieces on the board, ready to celebrate their triumph and my ultimate humiliation. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand how deeply this betrayal cut, one must understand exactly why I became the dropout they so openly despised. The narrative Oliver loved to spin to his country club friends, and to Addison and to Parker, was that I was lazy, that I lacked ambition, that at 19 years old, I simply couldn't handle the pressure of my sophomore year of college and quit to live a bohemian, aimless lifestyle. The truth was a secret I had carried on my shoulders for nearly 2 decades, a secret I kept specifically to protect the man who was now trying to ruin me. When I was 19, in the middle of my midterms, my mother came to me weeping. She had discovered that Oliver, in his desperate obsession to appear wealthier than he was, had taken out a massive, predatory second mortgage on our family home and subsequently lost every single penny of it, along with my entire college fund, on a series of disastrous, high-risk insider investments. We were weeks away from foreclosure. My mother was terrified, and Oliver was paralyzed by his own cowardice, refusing to get a regular job because it was beneath a man of his stature. So, I did what had to be done. I quietly withdrew from the university, getting a partial tuition refund that I immediately used to pay the mortgage arrears. I worked 3 jobs, waiting tables at dawn, answering phones at a dispatch center in the afternoon, and sorting packages in a warehouse until midnight. It was at that warehouse that I noticed the glaring inefficiencies in regional shipping routes. I started designing a better algorithm on my brakes, written on the backs of discarded packing slips. That algorithm became a small software program, which became a consulting side hustle, which eventually, over 15 grueling, agonizing years of blood, sweat, and absolute sacrifice, blossomed into Vanguard Solutions. I saved my family's home. I paid for Addison's expensive private college tuition, funneling the money through my mother so Oliver could pretend he was still the provider. I gave up my youth, my education, and my social life to clean up Oliver's mess. And when Vanguard exploded into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, I kept my name off the flashy press releases and maintained the facade of my little delivery hobby. I did it partly because I valued my privacy, but mostly because I knew that if Oliver ever found out I had real money, he would never stop trying to drain me dry. Oliver was the architect of all my suffering, yet he paraded around as if he were a king. He styled himself as an independent wealth and lifestyle consultant. It was a completely fabricated, vague profession that involved no actual work, no actual clients, and zero income. His entire life was a performance of wealth. He wore impeccably tailored, bespoke Italian suits that he purchased on high-interest credit cards. He drove a luxury sedan on a lease he could barely afford, constantly rolling the debt over month to month. He spent his days at the club, drinking expensive scotch, and judging everyone around him by the brand of their watch or the crest on their loafers. He was a hollow, disingenuous man, a glittering facade built over a foundation of absolute rot. For years, I had endured his pointed comments at family gatherings. He would always corner me, his eyes sharp and calculating, asking probing questions about my little business. "Are you incorporated yet, Emily?" he would ask, swirling his drink. "Do you have any actual equity? You know, if you ever manage to scrape together a few $1,000s in profit, I could manage it for you. Put it in a high-yield vehicle. Of course, my fees for family are quite reasonable." He was always sniffing around, looking for a weakness, looking for an asset he could latch onto and siphon. And now, he thought he had found his golden goose in Parker. Parker, a perfectly nice but somewhat naive middle manager, had just been hired as a senior director at Vanguard Solutions. It was a good title, but in the grand scheme of the corporate hierarchy I had built, it was solidly mid-level. To Oliver, however, Parker was the ticket to the big leagues. Oliver intended to use Parker's new salary and the inheritance he was stealing from me to finally live the billionaire lifestyle he felt he deserved. Oliver had manipulated Addison into turning against me. He had weaponized his new son-in-law's success to finally discard me like a broken toy. He thought he was the smartest man in the room, playing a game of chess while I was playing checkers. As my fever finally broke, leaving me clear-headed and cold with fury, I realized it was time to stop protecting him. It was time to let the facade crumble. It was time to show my father exactly who he had chosen to go to war with. The morning after my phone call with Oliver, the remnants of my fever had completely evaporated, leaving behind a chilling, razor-sharp focus. For decades, I had allowed myself to be the family punching bag. I had absorbed their insults, deflected their cruelty, and kept my head down, all in the name of preserving a toxic peace. I had believed that if I just stayed quiet and let Oliver play his role as the wealthy patriarch, they would eventually leave me alone. But they had not left me alone. They had decided to actively erase me. They were coming for the very trust I had secretly funded to save our family from ruin all those years ago. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to become the strategist I was born to be. I walked into my home office, a sleek, minimalist space dominated by a massive, multi-monitor setup that connected directly to the secure servers at Vanguard Solutions. I sat down in my leather executive chair, the soft material cool against my skin, and powered on my primary terminal. The screens flickered to life, bathing the room in a crisp, blue light. I bypassed the standard login and accessed the secure, encrypted communication channel reserved only for the C-suite. I didn't reach out to an outside investigator. I didn't need to. I had an entire corporate empire at my fingertips. I initiated a direct video call with Marcus Thorne, Vanguard's chief legal officer, and one of the few people on Earth who knew the full, unvarnished truth about my family. Marcus answered on the second ring, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he peered into his webcam. His office, a corner suite in our downtown headquarters, was visible behind him. "Emily, you look terrible. I thought you were supposed to be resting." "I was," I replied, my voice hard and steady. "The rest is over. We have a situation, Marcus, a personal one." Marcus immediately sat up straighter, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "Tell me." "My father, Oliver, is attempting to restructure the family trust," I explained, leaning closer to the microphone. "The one that holds the remaining equity from the original mortgage bailout. He's planning to transfer the assets to my brother-in-law, Parker. And, coincidentally, Parker has just been hired as a senior director here at Vanguard." Marcus frowned, his fingers already flying across his keyboard. "Parker, what's his last name?" I told him. I watched as Marcus's eyes scanned his secondary monitor. "Yes, here he is," Marcus murmured. "Mid-level executive, signed his offer letter 3 days ago. Solid background, nothing extraordinary. Why is your father funneling trust money to a new Vanguard hire?" "Oliver believes Parker is his ticket to high society," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. He wants to use the trust capital to help Parker buy into Vanguard's employee stock program. But here is the clever trap, Marcus. Oliver doesn't realize that the trust he is trying to break is bound by the ironclad stipulations we put in place 10 years ago to prevent him from squandering it. And more importantly, Oliver doesn't know that the Vanguard employee stock options for new hires are strictly vested over a 4-year period, with zero option for an initial lump sum buy-in. Marcus stopped typing, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. So, Oliver is trying to steal your money to buy stock that isn't for sale in a company you secretly own. Exactly, I said, leaning back in my chair. But I need to know why he's moving so fast. Oliver is lazy. For him to be initiating a legal restructuring, he must be desperate. I need you to run a full background and financial diagnostic on Oliver. Use the private forensic accounting firm we keep on retainer for corporate acquisitions. Dig into every single investment he's made over the last 5 years. I want to know where every penny of his debt is buried. Consider it done, Marcus said, his tone entirely professional. What about Parker? Flag Parker's onboarding file. Do not block his hiring. I want him exactly where he is. But I want full visibility on his department. I ended the call, the silence of my office feeling entirely different now. It was no longer the silence of isolation. It was the quiet hum of a machine powering up. The trap was set. Oliver had spent his life pretending to be a master of finance, but he was about to step into an arena where I held every single advantage. I was not a dropout scraping by. I was the architect of the very world they were trying to climb into, and I was going to let them climb just high enough to realize there was no safety net. 2 days later, the family gathered for a mandatory, pre-gala planning brunch at an upscale, overly manicured country club restaurant in the suburbs. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfumes and the clinking of crystal mimosas. I arrived exactly 15 minutes late, dressed not in the faded sweaters they were accustomed to, but in a tailored, charcoal gray designer blazer and crisp trousers. I felt the weight of their collective stare as I approached the table. Oliver sat at the head, wearing a ridiculous ascot and a heavy gold watch that I knew for a fact was a high-end replica. Addison sat to his right, her posture rigidly perfect, while Parker sat beside her, looking slightly uncomfortable in his stiff collar. "Well," Oliver announced loudly, ensuring the neighboring tables could hear. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence. Have you finished packing your little boxes for the day, Emily?" A few of the distant relatives sitting at the far end of the table chuckled softly. I didn't flinch. I calmly pulled out my chair and sat down, carefully placing my leather portfolio on the white linen tablecloth. "I made time in my schedule, Oliver," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and entirely devoid of emotion. "I wanted to discuss the trust." Addison sighed, rolling her eyes dramatically as she picked up her menu. "Emily, please, we are here to finalize the menu for the anniversary, not to discuss your grievances. Dad already explained the situation. Parker is moving into a completely different tax bracket. He needs the liquidity for his Vanguard stock options." "That's exactly what I wanted to talk about," I said, looking directly at Parker. Parker shifted in his seat, his eyes darting between me and Oliver. "Congratulations on the new role at Vanguard, Parker. Senior Director of Regional Logistics is a solid position." Parker puffed his chest out slightly. "Thank you, Emily. It's a very demanding role. The corporate culture there is intense. I'm going to be managing a lot of high-level moving parts." "I'm sure," I replied smoothly. "Which makes me wonder why Oliver has convinced you that you need to illegally liquidate an irrevocable family trust to buy stock." The table went dead silent. The clinking of glasses stopped. Oliver's face instantly flushed a dark, mottled crimson. "What are you talking about?" Addison snapped, leaning forward. "Dad isn't doing anything illegal. He's the executor of the estate." "He was the executor," I corrected, opening my leather portfolio and extracting a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the table toward Addison. until he attempted to leverage the trust against a highly speculative, unregistered offshore real estate venture last week. When he failed to secure the loan because the trust requires two signatures, mine being the second, he panicked. The bank placed an automatic freeze on all trust assets pending an investigation for financial misconduct. Oliver slammed his hand down on the table, rattling the silverware. "You are lying," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "You don't know the first thing about finance. You are a college dropout. You probably printed that fake document off the internet." "It's a certified notice from the primary holding bank, Oliver," I said, my voice never rising above a calm, conversational volume. I watched his eyes dart nervously toward Parker. "You promised Parker a massive influx of cash to buy Vanguard stock, but Vanguard doesn't even offer lump sum stock buy-ins for mid-level directors. Their options are strictly vested. You didn't do the most basic research. You were going to take the trust money, pretend it went into Parker's stock, and use it to pay off your own massive, spiraling debts at this very country club." "Shut your mouth," Oliver roared, losing all pretense of his refined country club persona. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face a mask of ugly, desperate malice. "You are nothing. You have always been nothing. You think you can come in here and destroy this family with your pathetic jealousy? I will cut you off completely. I will make sure you never see a single dime of your mother's money." "You can't cut me off from money you don't have, Oliver," I said quietly, holding his furious gaze. "Your accounts are empty, you are broke, and you are drowning." Addison looked horrified, snatching the paper from the table and staring at the bank logos. Oliver continued to spout poorly constructed lies and vicious threats, but his voice lacked any real power. He looked Ed Small, pathetic and entirely unmasked. I didn't stay to listen to the rest of his tantrum. I calmly stood up, picked up my portfolio, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the shattered pieces of his facade scattered across the white linen. The fallout from the restaurant confrontation was swift and entirely predictable. Oliver went into full damage control, spinning a frantic, desperate web of lies to keep Addison and Parker under his control. He called me incessantly, leaving furious, threatening voicemails demanding I retract my slanderous statements. When I didn't answer, he doubled down on his manipulation of Addison, claiming that I had fabricated the bank document out of pure, spiteful jealousy over Parker's success. Addison, desperately clinging to the illusion of her father's wealth and status, chose to believe him. She texted me late that night, a long, venomous paragraph accusing me of trying to ruin their parents' anniversary and demanding I apologize. But while they were busy arguing over the illusion, my investigation team was meticulously documenting reality. 2 days before the grand anniversary gala, Marcus Thorne requested an urgent, secure video meeting. When his face appeared on my screen, he looked uncharacteristically grim. "You were right about the desperation, Emily," Marcus said, bypassing any pleasantries. "But it's much worse than a few bad loans. Your father isn't just broke. He's actively running a small-scale, unregistered investment fraud scheme out of his country club." I felt a cold chill wash over me. "Explain." Marcus shared his screen, displaying a complex web of financial transfers and dummy LLCs. Over the last 4 years, Oliver has been soliciting investment capital from several of his affluent friends at the club, promising them exclusive access to high-yield offshore portfolios. There are no portfolios. He's been using the money to fund his own lifestyle, the cars, the suits, the club dues. It's a classic, textbook Ponzi structure. "And the money is gone," I stated, staring at the negative balances on the screen. "Completely gone," Marcus confirmed. "The only reason he hasn't been indicted yet is because his friends are too embarrassed to admit they were conned by him. But the walls are closing in. He owes nearly $2 million. He was going to use the family trust to pay off the most aggressive investors. When you blocked that, he pivoted to Parker." "Parker?" I asked, my brow furrowing. "Parker doesn't have $2 million. "No, but Vanguard Solutions does," Marcus said, bringing up a new document. We intercepted an email from Oliver to Parker this morning. Oliver has convinced Parker that in order to fully integrate into Vanguard's executive culture, Parker needs to make a massive, immediate charitable donation to a specific foundation. A foundation that, coincidentally, is controlled by Oliver. Oliver is trying to pressure Parker into taking out a massive, high-interest executive loan against his future Vanguard earnings to fund it. The sheer audacity of the scheme was staggering. Oliver was willing to utterly destroy his own son-in-law's financial future and professional reputation just to keep himself out of prison for a few more months. I printed the entire 60-page forensic accounting dossier. I didn't wait. I drove straight to Addison and Parker's townhouse in the city. It was raining heavily when I arrived. I hammered on the heavy oak door until Addison finally opened it. She was in her loungewear, her face instantly twisting into a scowl when she saw me standing on her porch. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, attempting to close the door. "I told you I don't want to speak to you until you apologize to Dad." I pushed my hand flat against the door, preventing her from closing it. "I'm not here for an apology, Addison. I'm here to stop your husband from committing financial suicide." Parker appeared in the hallway behind her, looking exhausted and stressed. "Emily, what's going on?" I stepped inside, ignoring Addison's protests, and dropped the heavy, thick dossier onto their glass entryway table. It landed with a heavy thud. "This," I said, pointing to the binder, "is a complete forensic accounting of Oliver's finances for the last 5 years. There is no wealth, Addison. There is no legacy. He has been running an illegal fraud scheme, and he is currently $2 million in debt." "Get out," Addison shrieked, her voice echoing in the hallway. "I am not listening to your insane conspiracy theories. Dad told us you would try something like this. You just can't stand that Parker is successful." I ignored her completely, locking eyes with Parker. "Parker, look at me. Oliver asked you to take out an executive loan today, didn't he? He told you to funnel it into a private foundation to secure your standing at Vanguard." Parker's face drained of all color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked terrified. How do you know about that?" He said it was a highly confidential executive strategy. "Because it's a lie, Parker," I said firmly, my voice cutting through Addison's rising hysteria. "I brought irrefutable proof. Look at the documents. Look at the wire transfers. If you sign that loan, Oliver will steal the money to pay off his defrauded investors, and you will be left holding a massive debt that will ruin your career before it even begins." Addison grabbed the dossier and tried to shove it back into my hands. "Don't look at it, Parker. She's crazy. She's just a jealous, bitter dropout." But Parker didn't listen to her. He reached out with a trembling hand, bypassed his wife, and opened the heavy binder. His eyes darted across the pages, scanning the highlighted bank records, the forged signatures, and the undeniable mathematical proof of Oliver's total financial ruin. I watched the exact moment the illusion shattered in Parker's mind. His shoulders slumped, and he looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and dawning realization. He lied to me," Parker whispered, the documents trembling in his hands. "He lied about everything." Before I could respond, Addison's phone rang loudly from the living room. The caller ID flashed brightly. Dad. The ultimate confrontation was finally here. The stage for the anniversary gala was set, and Oliver had no idea that the entire theater was about to burn to the ground. The evening of the 40th anniversary gala arrived with a bitter, biting chill in the air, the kind of deep cold that seeped right through to the bone. The event was held at the Beaumont Estate, a sprawling, obscenely expensive country manor venue that Oliver had undoubtedly booked using the absolute last fumes of his fraudulent credit. The driveway was lined with imported luxury vehicles, and the grand entrance was flanked by towering ice sculptures that glistened under the warm glow of the estate's exterior lighting. I arrived alone, stepping out of my modest sedan and handing the keys to a bewildered valet. I was not wearing the faded, invisible attire my family expected. Instead, I wore a bespoke, floor-length midnight blue gown that I had purchased in Paris the previous year after closing a massive European distribution deal. It was elegant, powerful, and entirely unapologetic. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped into the grand foyer, immediately hit by the overwhelming scent of expensive floral arrangements and the sound of a live string quartet playing in the adjacent ballroom. I saw them immediately. Oliver was holding court near the grand staircase, a crystal champagne flute in his hand, surrounded by a circle of our distant, wealthy relatives. Addison was by his side, draped in borrowed jewels, playing the role of the devoted, high society daughter perfectly. I walked toward the coat check, the click of my heels echoing slightly on the marble floor. I wasn't even out of my jacket when my dad said, loudly enough for the entire foyer to hear, "Didn't know they let dropouts in here." A few relatives laughed, a chorus of polite, condescending titters that I had heard 1,000 times before. They looked at me with varying expressions of pity and amusement. Oliver smirked, taking a long sip of his champagne, clearly immensely proud of his cruel little joke. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded, handed my wool coat to the attendant, and took a seat at the back. True to Addison's word, table 12 was a small, unsteady round table positioned directly next to the heavy, swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. Every time a waiter rushed past, a gust of hot, food-scented air washed over me. I sat alone, my back straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and I simply watched. I watched Oliver glide through the room, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, and performing the role of the benevolent patriarch. I watched Addison preen and boast to anyone who would listen. And I watched Parker. Parker looked physically ill. He sat at the massive, heavily decorated head table at the front of the room, his face pale and drawn. He barely touched his appetizer. He kept glancing down at his lap, where I suspected his phone was hidden, likely verifying the horrific financial data I had dropped on his entryway table 48 hours prior. The dinner service was agonizingly slow. When the plates were finally cleared, the string quartet stopped playing, and a heavy, expectant hush fell over the ballroom. Oliver stood up from the head table, tapping his silver spoon against his crystal flute. Clink, clink, clink. "Family, friends, esteemed guests," Oliver began, his voice booming through the microphone the DJ had provided. He adjusted his expensive silk tie. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating 40 years of marriage. We are celebrating the enduring legacy of this family. A legacy built on excellence, on tradition, and on uncompromise. Eyeing success." He gestured grandly toward his right. "And speaking of success, I want to take a special moment to recognize my brilliant new son-in-law, Parker. Parker has just been appointed as a senior director at Vanguard Solutions, one of the most prestigious firms in the country. He is the future of our family's prosperity, and I am honored to announce that tomorrow, we will be making a massive, unified family investment to secure his place among the corporate elite." Applause erupted across the ballroom. Addison beamed, clapping enthusiastically. But Parker didn't smile. He didn't stand to acknowledge the applause. Instead, he slowly pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. He stood up, his hands trembling at his sides, his eyes locked entirely on Oliver. The applause slowly died out, replaced by a confused murmuring. Parker ignored his father-in-law completely. He turned away from the head table and began to walk. He walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, past the extravagant centerpieces, past the whispering relatives, directly toward the back of the room. He walked until he reached table 12. He stood in front of me, breathing heavily, completely ignoring the stares of the entire room. "Emily," Parker said, his voice loud enough to carry in the now quiet room, "those documents you gave me, the forensic accounting, you said you had a team investigate him. You said you had a corporate legal department handle it." "I do," I replied calmly, looking up at him. "I verified the account numbers," Parker continued, his voice shaking. "You were right. Everything you showed me was real. The loan he tried to make me sign today, it was a complete fraud, but I don't understand. How did you get that kind of corporate leverage? Where do you work? I held his gaze, my voice perfectly steady and clear. I told you, Parker, I work at Vanguard Solutions. Parker frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. But I checked the employee directory this morning. I looked for your name. You aren't in the regional system. You aren't in the corporate tier. You aren't anywhere. I am the founder, I said, the words cutting through the air like a blade. I told him the company name, my full corporate title, and the exact ownership structure. He paused, looked me over again, taking in the designer gown, the complete lack of intimidation, and the absolute certainty in my eyes. Then he took a step back, the blood draining completely from his face. He said, "Wait, you're my CEO." The room went dead silent. It was a profound, suffocating silence. Not a single glass clinked, not a single breath was heard. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. "What is this?" Oliver suddenly bellowed from the front of the room, his face a terrifying shade of purple as he marched down the aisle, the microphone still clutched in his hand. "What kind of pathetic lie are you spinning now, Emily? Stop ruining this dinner immediately." I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I smoothed the front of my gown and met my father's furious gaze. "I am not lying, Oliver," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the vast, silent ballroom. "I dropped out of college to save this family from the secret second mortgage you took out and lost on fraudulent investments. I spent 15 years building Vanguard Solutions from the ground up to pay your debts. And while you sit up there bragging about legacy, you have spent the last 5 years running an unregistered Ponzi scheme out of your country club, defrauding your own friends to the tune of $2 million. "Liar!" Oliver screamed, spit flying from his lips. He lunged forward, but several of his friends, the very men he had stolen from, suddenly stood up from their tables, their faces dark with dawning realization and fury. "I have the bank records, Oliver," I continued, my voice rising to fill the room, unwavering and absolute. "I have the wire transfers to the dummy LLCs. I have the proof that you tried to liquidate my mother's trust, and when I stopped you, you tried to trick Parker into taking out a fraudulent executive loan to save yourself from federal prison." I looked at Addison, who was still sitting at the head table, her hands covering her mouth in absolute horror. "He has nothing, Addison. The suits, the cars, the club memberships, it's all stolen money. And the Vanguard empire he just tried to claim as his own, it belongs entirely to the daughter he just shoved by the kitchen doors." Oliver dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening screech of feedback, making several guests wince. He looked frantically around the room, realizing that the wealthy friends he relied on were now glaring at him with pure hatred. He had been completely, systematically unmasked. The illusion was dead. The climax of the gala shattered the family structure entirely. There was no recovery for Oliver. Within minutes of my public exposure, the whispers turned into shouting matches. The men he had defrauded cornered him near the coat check, demanding answers, demanding their money. The venue manager, sensing a massive liability, threatened to call the authorities. I didn't stay to watch him squirm. I had done what I came to do. I walked out of the Beaumont estate, the cold night air feeling incredibly refreshing against my skin. The consequences for Oliver were swift and absolute. The following morning, armed with the forensic accounting dossier I had provided, 3 of his largest investors formally filed charges against him. Marcus Thorne ensured that the evidence was meticulously organized and delivered directly to the state regulatory board. Oliver's assets, what little remained, were immediately frozen. He was evicted from his leased luxury apartment, expelled from his country club, and forced to face a mountain of legal indictments that would ensure he spent the twilight of his life answering for his decades of deceit. Addison's world collapsed just as thoroughly. Stripped of the financial safety net she believed she had, and deeply humiliated by her blind allegiance to our father's lies, she retreated entirely. She stopped calling. She stopped making demands. The false superiority she had worn like a crown had simply dissolved into thin air. But the most profound resolution came 2 weeks later, in a quiet, warmly lit conference room on the top floor of the Vanguard Solutions headquarters. I was reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant knocked softly on the glass door. "Ms. Vanguard, Senior Director Parker is here to see you. He says he has an appointment." "Send him in," I said, closing my laptop. Parker walked into the room tentatively. He looked different, humbled, exhausted, but somehow lighter. He didn't look like the arrogant executive Oliver had tried to mold him into. He looked like a man who had just survived a very near miss. He stood across from my desk, shifting nervously. "Emily, Ms. Vanguard, I didn't know what to call you." "Emily is fine, Parker," I said softly, gesturing to the chair opposite me. "Please sit down." He sat, resting his hands on his knees. He looked around the expansive office, taking in the reality of the empire I had built while my family called me a failure. "I wanted to come up here to thank you," Parker said, his voice thick with emotion. "I formally declined the loan Oliver was pushing me toward. I met with Vanguard's internal financial advisors, and they confirmed exactly what you said. If I had signed those papers, I would have been completely ruined. My career would have been over before it started." "Oliver is a very convincing salesman," I replied gently. "He preys on ambition. He knew you wanted to succeed, and he weaponized that against you. I wasn't going to let him destroy you just to buy himself a few more months of freedom." Parker looked down at his hands, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "I am so sorry, Emily. I am sorry for how Addison treated you. I am sorry for how I let them talk about you. I was so caught up in trying to impress him that I didn't see the truth right in front of me." "The truth is often quieter than the lie, Parker," I said, leaning forward and offering him a genuine, reassuring smile. "You are safe here at Vanguard. You earned your position on your own merit. Do the work, build your career, and leave the toxicity behind. That is the only legacy that matters now." He nodded, a profound sense of relief washing over his face. When Parker left my office that day, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I had carried since I was 19 years old. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling, vibrant city skyline below. For 20 years, I had allowed my father to dictate my worth. I had allowed him to banish me to the shadows while he basked in the light of my sacrifices. But I had finally rewritten the narrative. I had protected what was mine, exposed the fraud, and ensured that justice was served fully and completely. The dropout had become the architect of her own destiny. And for the first time in my life, I felt entirely, wonderfully at peace.